go to my Telegram channel. Link is in the description below. The before last post that I have up has some images and a couple of links that I want you to look at. But please, under no circumstances, harass anyone. Do not harass them. Do not troll them. Do not abuse them. Do not even interact with them. It's just FYI. Go check out those links and that information, which is going to be relevant to this conversation later on. Now, let me explain how I'm going to structure this live stream. I'm going to begin with like an introduction about stuff that's happened, and that'll last, I don't know, about half an hour or something like that. And then I'm going to go into the meat and potatoes of today's broadcast, which is false flag is coming to Kiev. Or maybe Poland. Okay. And I'll explain why there's an uncertainty as to where it's coming. But I think I have a fairly decent idea of when it's going to happen. And yeah, well, I'll get into that. So be patient. It's important now to talk about a couple of things that have happened in the world that are pretty surprising. This morning, I woke up to the news, the very unexpected news, that Taylor Hawkins had died. He's the drummer for the Foo Fighters. I'm not a big Foo Fighters fan. I've heard a couple of their songs, and one of them, Everlong. I always thought that was a delightful tune. But I'm not a big fan, but nothing against them, frankly. And Taylor Hawkins was this like blonde surfer dude kind of guy, 50 years old, 4 years younger than me, big Rush fan. And that's always, good in my books, right? And he died. He was on tour in apparently Colombia or Venezuela, something like that. And he died completely unexpectedly. They're not releasing the cause of death, but the Foo Fighters were notorious that they did not allow anybody to go to their concerts who was not fully vaccinated. Schadenfreude is a very, very bad emotion, and you should not feel it. You should try to stop that emotion from flowering in your heart. Schadenfreude is bad, bad, bad. But we do have to pay attention to the fact that there seems to be a lot of excess deaths going on, a lot of them. And people who are relatively young and healthy dropping like flies all of a sudden for no reason whatsoever. Yeah, that's just no. Some people are saying that it's drugs. Oh, and by the way, just checking up on the chat. I just want to say hi to my moderators, The Truth and Kat. Thank you guys so much for moderating once again. And anyway, it doesn't look like it's, well, we don't know. We don't know because they haven't announced anything. They've just said he died unexpectedly in privacy for his family, which is, of course, very reasonable. He was married with 3 kids. It's a tragedy, a relatively young man, in apparently good health. Apparently, he was, not a big druggie, but, who knows what happens in private. So we won't know. But it's very odd that such a young man would go like this. And what's going on is that there are a lot of excess mortality. Now, I've been hearing about excess mortality since middle of last year. I first heard about it from this undertaker in the UK. And I kind of like, okay, good to know this data point, but I didn't, think much of it. Because a problem that happens sometimes is that the person that is giving you this data might be somebody that you are suspicious of. Now, this undertaker was very, he was out of sorts. And that, of course, made me think that maybe this guy's just, panicking for no reason. See? And that's a normal human reaction, by the way. That when you see somebody who's out of sorts, a little bit like, oh my God, this is happening, you think, well, maybe they're panicking and it's not that bad. That's the instinctive reaction that I have. Because, lots of times, you panic over something and maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe it's completely explainable. But the point is that over the months, it's become readily apparent that there are more excess deaths. And we are seeing people dropping like flies all over the goddamn place now, aren't we? Yeah, and it's frightening. Rafael Nadal had to take a medical break because he felt like all this pain in his heart and chest area. What was that all about? I mean, one of the best athletes alive, and he has to take a medical break. You know what's going on, man. You know. And so the other thing that's going on in that particular topic, and of course, you notice that I'm not mentioning what it is, because I can't. Because if I do, I get into all kinds of trouble. The other thing that's going on is AIDS. A lot of AIDS testing. And a lot of people are saying that certain people who've taken certain medications are immunocompromised in a way that is very similar to AIDS. Mm. And that's very interesting. That's extremely interesting. And I myself, well, I know two women who took the certain medication and they have lost their uteruses. Mhm. And that's a tragedy. One was 29 and the other was 37, and they both have uterine cancer. Mhm. And one of them seems to be responding well to chemo, and the other not so well. The younger one actually is not responding so well. Mhm. And there's a fear of more on the way. And these two women, one of them is in Chile and the other is in Holland. Yeah, that's the story. And I know them. I know them well enough to know that it's not baloney. And the thing that I'm concerned about are babies. I'm following Abby Shapiro, I think her name is, the sister of Ben Shapiro. Abby Shapiro, I assume that that's her name. She has Constant Abby Constant, something like that, some YouTube channel. And I'm following her, not very closely, obviously. I don't really care about her content, and I find her distinctly creepy. But she took the medication, and shortly thereafter, she miscarried. And after she was able to get pregnant again, and she's currently coming to the end of her pregnancy, she's due any day now. And I've been following that situation because I want to know what happens with that infant. I hope that all's good. But that's the thing that I personally think that we should be paying attention to. Not to mention the issue of the AIDS and the excess deaths. Now, I heard a clip that's floating around from Rumble. It's in some of the crazier corners of Telegram, saying that in the military they have over 1,000% excess deaths in the U.S. military in the last year. Of course, non-combat. Now that's kind of crazy, and it makes a lot of sense that they would know the exact number because it's an insanely large number. And what happens, of course, in the military, they track the physical condition of every single soldier, which makes complete sense, right? And so they know exactly how out of whack the excess deaths are. Now, I myself have not seen these figures officially from any linked source, and frankly, I haven't really been looking because I've obviously got my hands full with other stuff that I'm paying attention to. But this excess mortality thing, yeah, that's something to pay attention to. Very much pay attention to, okay? Yeah, the excess mortality, because as I said months ago, you can't hide the dead bodies, okay? That's the one thing. First of all, there's no ambiguity because they're either alive or they're dead. And you can't hide them. Because you can hide whether somebody has some disease or not, because you say, oh, they died of this disease when in fact they were hit by a truck and had the disease at the same time. Or you can say, oh, they got hit by a truck when actually they might have been nicked by the truck but died of this disease. There are ways to fudge that part. But whether they're alive or dead, you can't fudge that. It's a yes, no, on, off kind of situation, right? Binary. And so I think that the excess mortality, that's the number we should be paying attention to. Okay, so the second point I want to talk about in this introduction is the India rebuffs the UK's emissaries and rolls out the red carpet for Wang Yi, who's the Chinese foreign minister. Oh, man. See, India does not want to sanction Russia. India does not want to be mixed up in this whole we hate Russia narrative because India has long-standing ties to Russia, okay? And very good, positive, long-standing ties back when it was the Soviet Union and now that it's Russia, the Russian Federation. Because what has happened is that over the years, at different moments, the Russians went out of their way to forge strong relationships with India, with the Indian leadership, They stood by India when it had issues with Pakistan, when Pakistan at that time was allied to the United States. And so everybody was on Pakistan's side and nobody was in India's corner. And the Russians came through. And so the Prime Minister Modi, said in a speech recently that what kind of people would they be if they turned their back on their friend when the friend needed them? Mm? And those are powerful words because he gave the speech in the Indian parliament. Mm? And so the fact that he was saying this spoke volumes. Yeah, it's not just the words that he said, but the place that he said them and the moment that he said them. And the Americans insist on trying to get India to follow up on the sanctions against Russia. And the Americans, of course, because they're stupid, because of the reasons I explained in my broadcast yesterday, they're so damn stupid that they are threatening to sanction India if India doesn't sanction Russia. Yeah, yes, I mean it's just the arrogance, the hubris, the inability to understand the other's motivation. See, I mean, you're a grown up, I'm a grown up. Suppose we have a mutual acquaintance, John Smith, and I can't stand John Smith, and he's your buddy, you're a good buddy. Does that mean that you and I are going to get in a fight? No. I mean, I don't like John Smith over there, right? He's just a jerk as far as I'm concerned. But you and John Smith being friends doesn't affect you and me being friends, you know? And if you want to think to yourself that maybe at some point you can act as a bridge between me and John Smith, fine. I'm not going to go down that road because I really hate John Smith. But you and I mean, we're buddies. That ain't going to change, right? That's the mature attitude, the attitude of adults. And you have to understand the situation of the Indians. They have huge trade with Russia, essential trade with Russia. They don't have any beef with Russia, and Russia has stood by them in difficult times. And so the Americans are trying to bludgeon the Indians, and the Indians are like, well, what do we do? And the Indians have had longstanding problems with China, and the Chinese have said, let's fix them. Let's really make the effort to fix them because we're all in the same boat. The Europeans and the Americans want to sanction us to death like they're doing with Russia. And the Indians are looking at the Chinese and saying, dude, maybe you might be right. And all these little pissant little problems that you and I have, maybe we should solve them quickly so that we have a united front against the Europeans and the Americans especially, because these last few weeks, it's become increasingly clear that Europe, the European nations, they're vassal states. They're piddly-ass little nothing states that, just ride the coattails of the Americans, right? And that's becoming increasingly clear, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But the point, India told the UK delegation that wanted to show up to India, told them to take a hike. They're just not to bother. Okay. And they rolled out the red carpet for Wang Yi. And not only that, what's important is that, Wang Yi showed up, and they actually started making definitive progress on a whole bunch of issues that India and China have, because they're both motivated. See, their common enemy, the United States, stupidly is putting pressure on the two of them to make friends. And see, the big problem between the two of them are water rights, because the Chinese want to dam the water of the Himalayas that's on their side of the border, but the Indians depend on that water flow for agriculture. And so they don't want those dams to happen. And so what's going to happen? Very simple. The Chinese and the Indians are going to sit down and get serious and say, look, this water thing, we both need something from the water. Let's figure out a way to work together. Let's figure out a way that we can solve this problem. Perhaps we can come to some arrangement of seasonality or whatever mechanism, so that we're both happy and we resolve these problems once and for all, because we have a common enemy that's going to come and wreck our economy just like they wrecked the Russians' economy. Which isn't that wrecked anyway, but we'll get to that in just a moment. And see what the Americans are doing? It's hubris, it's arrogance, it's this stupid notion that they keep saying that, the United States is the indispensable nation. No, it ain't. And the thing that must really, really freak out the Treasury Department in the United States is that the Indians have said to the Russians, let's figure out a way to trade in rubles and rupees. Rupees are the currency of the Indians. Let's figure out a way to trade in rubles and rupees and bypass the dollar altogether. And the Russians are like, yeah, you're on, buddy. And they're figuring out a way, and they're going to have a way. Okay, it's not going to be that complicated. As I've been arguing, um, I think that the Russian ruble will become the global reserve currency, insane though that may sound. Okay, and I know mainstream economists are saying that that's impossible, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, he who's got the commodities makes the reserve currency, and the Russians have the commodities, and the Americans don't. Mm. So, anyway, the India thing, that's a big deal. Of course, I bet on CNN and whatever news organization you're watching, nobody's paying attention to that. I bet. I bet they're just ignoring that. Like, who cares? Or if they ever mention it, they say those evil Indians are trying to be friends with China. Like, yeah, you shouldn't be friends with your biggest neighbor right next door. Come on, these people, man. I mean, where do they find these people? Well, I explained, an hour and a half yesterday, I explained how they came across these people. They're full of arrogance, hubris, and stupidity because they can't put themselves in the shoes of the other. Now, the third point I wanted to do to introduce the topic of today, the Russians gave a briefing on Thursday. Okay, this is a very interesting briefing. See, extremely interesting. The Russians gave this briefing and they said how Hunter Biden, had a company called Metabiota, Metabiota, Metabiota. It sounds so weird. Anyway, this company had a contract with the U.S. Department of Defense. It was Hunter Biden had a piece of it through his Rosemont Seneca Technology partners. Let me just move my computer in a better, more comfortable position. And there, I think that there's good. Yeah, okay. And basically that what was going to go on was that, Hunter Biden, through this Metabiota, well, basically, bottom line, Metabiota was the company running these biolabs in Ukraine, the 26 biolabs or 30. I think it's 26, doesn't matter. These biolabs in Ukraine run by Metabiota under a Department of Defense contract. And a lot of information is coming out that it wasn't that, wasn't fire and forget. It wasn't that the DoD gave money to Metabiota and it was all Metabiota and they had like a hands-off approach. Oh, no, 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 no. It turns out that all kinds of people from the Pentagon were showing up at these labs in Ukraine, these biolabs that produced weapons, all kinds of plague and all kinds of very scary diseases and all kinds of genetic research targeting Slavic people. And so the Russians gave this briefing, right? And everybody's like, oh, this is all a lie, blah, blah. They also went on to say that Hunter Biden introduced Burisma people to Metabiota people to figure out a way that they could work together. The gas giant that Hunter Biden was a member of the board, where he was getting $83,000 a month, $1 million a year, to do basically nothing, a no-show job, right? Just because he was the son of the president, and this all during the Obama administration, right? And he introduced Burisma to Metabiota, and Burisma, as I've told you, has very serious links to Kolomoisky, the oligarch who set up Zelensky, and Goldman Sachs did a round of financing for Metabiota. They raised a few $1 million, okay? And, that's what the Russians were talking about on Thursday in their Thursday briefing, right? And everybody in the States is like, no, this is all a lie. This is all Russian propaganda, blah, blah, blah. But it turns out that all of this stuff is confirmed in the laptop from hell. Hunter Biden's laptop. It confirms everything. It confirms everything that the Russians say. Because you got to understand something. When the Russians, when they put out one of their their formal briefings, okay, from the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of the Interior, whatever ministry, but if it's a formal thing, the Russians never lie. They're smart that way because they know that a lie will eventually, catch them. And so they avoid that like the plague. They know they're smart that way. They might not tell the whole truth, but they never lie, okay? They lie by omission, but never a proactive lie, which is a very, very smart policy. You should listen. You should follow it, okay? They laid this all out on Thursday, and everybody said that it's all bullshit, but then it all came out in the laptop, because on the laptop was the negative side of everything that the Russians were saying. And it's true. Hunter Biden is involved in this metabiota, which does run these labs, these bioweapons labs in Ukraine. And he did put Burisma and metabiota in bed together. And Goldman Sachs did put money up or figure out a way to raise funds for this thing, all through Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners outfit, which is just a weird name, but okay, whatever. See, it's all true. Okay. It's goddamn funny. It's clown world, man. I mean, this kind of conspiracy, it's just insane. Really. And the more that this stuff goes on, the more I tend to think that what everybody in Washington is really freaking out is that there's more secrets in Ukraine. There's more dirt, okay? This dirt came out in the Mail Online, okay? I'm not kidding. Go look it up. Hunter Biden, Metabiota, Rosemont Seneca. That's all you have to type in, and Daily Mail. And all this stuff, there comes a big article on the Daily Mail about this stuff. Okay, I forgot to get the link to it, but it's fun for you. Go and use your Google a little bit. Hunter Biden, Metabiota, Mail Online. This is real, man. It's unbelievable. I mean, I'm like shocked. This makes Watergate look like nothing. I mean, this is so trivial. I mean, excuse me, a Watergate is so trivial in comparison to this stuff. This is extraordinary. This is stuff that, this is impeachable offenses. As simple as that. Okay, because there's enough evidence in the laptop to definitively say that not only did Joe Biden know about this stuff, he was getting a piece of the action. Okay, the 10% kicked upstairs to the big guy, and some other stuff. Oh man, yeah, I mean, it's so clear that Joe Biden was in on this stuff. I mean, it really is corruption of the most blatant sort. And the fact that, the Republicans in the House and Senate, they're not even mentioning the word impeachment. Come on, man. Come on. I mean, how corrupt does somebody have to be to get impeached around here? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just shocking, you know? But that's the kind of country the United States is. It's corrupt to the core. It's all corrupt. It's all lies. You know, Putin might be a bad, bad man. Putin might be a bad man and he's a dictator and Russia is just hell itself and blah, blah. But he wasn't wrong when he called the United States the empire of lies. You got to give the devil his due. I mean, if Putin is the devil, you got to admit when he's saying something that you're like, yeah, it's pretty much accurate. The United States is the empire of lies. Don't give me this stuff that it's not. Don't give me this stuff that it's the essential nation or some nonsense like that, or it's the exceptional nation. No, it is an empire of lies. And we are living at the end of the global American empire. It is collapsing. And good riddance to bad rubbish. The only thing that we ought to be worried about is that in this collapse, the global American empire does not lash out with nuclear weapons or chemical weapons or biological weapons, which it has, and kills a lot of innocent people for no other reason than because it's throwing a temper tantrum as it slowly circles the drain and is just flushed away. Mm. And I'm telling you now, America bros, see, you guys are going to experience a poverty that people in India know about. I'm not kidding, okay? The way things are going, man, it's going to be catastrophic for you guys. And your dumb leadership is leading you off a cliff, and you're all too stupid and passive to do anything about it. Mm? So, yeah, that's what's happening, baby. And this corruption, I mean, think of this shit. I mean, come on. I mean, chat, am I wrong here? Is this the Hunter Biden with the metabiota thing? Is this not the most corrupt thing you've ever heard? Hit +1 if you think it's the most corrupt thing you've ever heard. And if you think it's a totally normal, hit N for totally normal. Okay? The most corrupt thing possible, +1. If you think it's totally normal, hit N. Let's see what chat has to say. I'll give a little, it takes a while for chat to catch up. It's probably hit the like button. Whoever's saying hit the like button, stop doing that because it's annoying. Yeah, well, I don't know how long it'll take for the chat to catch up, so I'll just move on because I don't want to like. I want to give you your. I want you to feel that it's time well worth spent. Listening to my rambling. I don't want to be rambling. I want to be ranting, but not rambling. Yeah. So anyway, the point I want to make here is that this stuff is so corrupt. It's so despicable. Okay, and this is what happens at the end of every collapsing empire. The amount of blatant corruption is off the charts, and we're seeing it. Okay, now let's talk about the meat and potatoes of today's broadcast, which is a false flag coming to Kiev or Poland, and it might be chemical or nuclear, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, you got to understand the key issues here. Okay, insofar as this invasion by Russia of Ukraine, it is existential for the Russians. They need to win this, and they will win it because they're bigger. And as far as they are concerned, this is existential. This is a fight to the death. This is the hill to die on. Okay? This is not like for the Americans when they go off to Afghanistan or Iraq or some, crap hole like that. That means really absolutely nothing to them and really doesn't affect the United States one way or the other. No, no, no. Ukraine for Russia, apart from a whole bunch of cultural and psychological issues, I mean, it's a big deal here. For Russia, having NATO or having Ukraine be a part of NATO, it's intolerable. Ukraine is existential for the Russians, and they are going to fight to the last man. And they could have the worst leadership on the planet with the worst equipment and no air cover at all, and just they could be a complete mess, and still the Russians are going to fight to the last man. Okay, because it's that important for them. Because it is. Okay, it's like if the Chinese started putting nuclear missiles in Canada, how would the Americans react? I mean, honestly. So if you don't understand that, then you do not understand the whole Ukraine situation. Because for the Ukrainians, it's also existential. Obviously, their country is being invaded, and they're going to fight as hard as they can to the last man as well. And that's what they've been doing, quite frankly. But the Russians are more, and they're better equipped, and frankly, they're better led, and they want it just as bad as the Ukrainians. So that's why it's going to get really ugly before it's over. And I pray to God that it's over quickly, but it's looking that it might be a little bit longer than anticipated, but be that as it may. And I could be wrong about that, and I'm going to explain in a little bit. Because where we are now, this is the Ministry of Defense, the Russian Ministry of Defense, yesterday gave a briefing, okay? And they said that this was the end of the first phase. It was basically 1 month of operations, right? 4 weeks. And they said it was the end of the first phase. And in the end of the first phase, they reported that they had suffered 1,350 dead and 3,800 casualties, incapacitated, okay? Wounded in action. Now that's roughly almost 3 to 1 wounded to dead. And they said that they had achieved their goals for this moment. Okay, and the West interpreted this as basically meaning no, that they had failed, basically. Okay, the West gave this invasion an F. And it seems to me that the Western interpretation is there are 2 problems here. First of all, the West doesn't want to get into the shoes of the Russians and understand the Russians' goals. As I explained yesterday, the elites in America and the West do not have empathy. It's been bred out of them. And so they don't see what the Russians are doing. They don't understand it. They only look at it through their own lens. And see, the Americans, what would they do? They would go in and they would bomb everything. They would just level the whole thing, just turn it to rubble, okay? When the war started in Kiev, everybody thought that they were going to start bombing the center of the city and bombing this, bombing that, like the Americans do, because that's how the Americans have sort of like taught the rest of the world that war is. You fly in, you bomb everything, and you bomb it for weeks and weeks and weeks, like they did in Serbia, like they did in Iraq, like they did in Afghanistan, like they did in Libya. You just bomb it to the Stone Age, and then you roll in with your tanks for a mopping up. But the Russians didn't do that. The Russians use their air power to hit targets. They use cruise missiles to hit targets, military targets exclusively, and they rolled in with their tanks at the same time. Combined forces, right? First time since the Second World War, probably, right? Well, no, Vietnam, but anyway, the point is, see, they waged a completely different kind of war because they had different political priorities. Because the United States, the Americans, don't think of war as the extension of politics. They think of war as separate from politics. You talk and negotiate and negotiate, and when you're done negotiating, you go to war. It's either talking or killing. But the Russians don't think that way. And the Russians think of like, we're going to go to war and we're going to try to take it over, but at the same time, we're going to continue to talk because it's a political process. Because we want to achieve objectives, and we can achieve those objectives politically and or militarily. It's not either or, it's both and. And that's how the Russians think. And the Russians, of course, they're not thinking that they want to destroy Ukraine. Oh no. As I said, on the second day of the invasion, the reason I got into all kinds of trouble with my Ukrainian acquaintances and the hotel I was staying at, the Russians don't want to destroy Ukraine. They want to capture it. They want to capture the Ukrainian army. They don't want to destroy it because they're going to need it later, because they know, they understand that you cannot, you know, eliminate the army of a country, because that only leads to chaos. Look what happened to Iraq. The Americans came in, they destroyed the Iraqi army and threw all the soldiers out on the street. And what happened to Iraq? It became a lawless shithole, of course. Because if you have all these men with nothing to do, unemployed, and they need to feed their families, what are they going to turn to? The obvious, and they have. And so the West does not understand the objectives of the Russians. First of all, it has to be understood. Secondly, they don't believe when Vladimir Putin says something, when the Russians say something. They don't believe anything he says, even though when what he says is accurate or concordant with his actions. See? In previous opportunities, in previous wars that he's carried out, he said what he wants, and his actions have borne that out. You know, it's not that he's saying one thing and doing another, like American leaders do. And that was the thing about the Chinese the other day that Xi Jinping was so pissed off about, because he was talking to Biden, and Biden was saying all kinds of pretty words, and Xi Jinping was saying, well, you're going to tell me pretty words, you know, but then a couple of days later, you're going to hurt me somehow, or do some policy that is going to hurt me. And Biden's like, no, that's a misunderstanding. That's not going to happen. He hung up the phone, and 2 days later, they start sanctioning Chinese. What the hell? It proved his point that the United States is an empire of lies. Their actions and their words don't match. And they are so used to lying that when other people are not like that, other people, other countries are not liars, psychopathic liars like the Americans are, because they are, because their actions prove it. What they did just a couple of days ago with China, where they promise that, you know, we're going to be nice to you, and then 2 days later, they like poke them with sanctions for China. Psychopathic liars. And so they assume that everybody else is a psychopathic liar too. And so when they come across somebody who says, I'm going to do this for these reasons, they don't believe them. That's what happens, see? The psychopathic liar cannot believe if somebody's telling you exactly what he's going to do and why he's going to do it. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, that's the problem. So insofar as the West is concerned, they think that the Russians are losing, okay? And they kind of like, they're like, you know, and it's so bizarre because they are sure that the Americans are losing, and yet the Russians keep losing forward somehow. I'm trying to figure out a way to express the fact that they keep losing and yet taking towns and taking ground and winning battles. They keep losing this way. You know, if they keep on losing this way, man, pretty soon they're going to have the whole goddamn country. Huh? You know what I'm saying? Jesus Christ. Anyway, the Western interpretation, and this was across the board, all of the experts, they were all on board that the Russians are losing. But hang on a second. Let me just... you have to understand here what the Russian objective is, okay? And they've expressed it multiple times. This is not a big secret, okay? The Russians, they have the following goal. Demilitarization of Ukraine, denazification. Those are the two goals. And they want to secure the Donbass forever to make sure that nothing happens to the ethnic Russians there. Mhm. And they want to make sure that, okay, that's what they want. So what have they done? Okay. See, the Russians, and they have said this, okay? I'm basically reporting what they themselves have said. The Russians figured that if they launch a war in the Donbass, mm, against the amassed army of the Ukrainians at the Donbass, at the contact line, which is true, by the way. It is coming out that that is absolutely true. The Ukrainians were going to launch a surprise attack on the Donbass to take it over, and the Russians just beat them to the punch. Well, the Russians have said now in their various briefings that if they had engaged the Ukrainian army in the Donbass, then all of the troops of Ukraine would have amassed in the Donbass, and there would have been a steady flow of weapons from the west to the Donbass region, and it would have been a war of attrition that the Russians would have eventually lost because the Europeans and the Americans would not have sent any troops. They would have just sent weapons and equipment, and it would have been an endless stream, right? So they realized that they had to cut off that stream. And how did they do that? They had to cut off two things. They had to, number one, make sure that the army at the Donbass, which estimates seem to put it at 60,000 men, the 60,000 frontline troops, okay, fighters, those men were not reinforced. They had to make sure of that. Number two, they had to make sure that they could interdict any weapons from the West. Okay, those are the two key components. So what did they decide to do? They launched a coordinated assault from the south and the north. And the idea was, of course, see, here's the east of Ukraine. It's like this, right? It's like that. Okay, here's the east. I hope I hope it's on the right side for you guys. Okay, here's the east. Here's the north, and here's the south. Here's Crimea. So they launched from Crimea and from the north, where Kiev is. Kiev is roughly here. They launched attacks like a pincer movement, and basically they cut off any flow from here because even though they haven't linked up, they're close enough and their air superiority is such that they can capture and interdict any flow of weapons, which they have been doing, right? But why did they do that, of like attacking from the south and from the north? Well, and why did they attack Kharkov, where I am located? Their rationale, which if you look at it from their point of view is completely rational, their rationale was if they launch an offensive against Kiev and Kharkov in the north and the northeast, and also from the south, if they hit Kherson and drive up the coast in a north east direction along the coast of the Sea of Azov, all the way to Mariupol and further on, right? Well, the main army that's on the Donbass contact line will not be able to be, what you call it, they won't get more soldiers, right? They won't be reinforced. They won't be able to be reinforced because those soldiers will be busy. The ones in Kiev will be busy defending Kiev. The ones in Kharkov are going to be busy defending Kharkov. The ones in Mariupol, which is where the main army of the Azov battalion was stationed, and it's turning out to be a lot more than, I thought it was merely like 15,000 men. No, that was 15,000 men at the end, okay? And what you call it, the total group of the Azov battalion, this is a number that I'm trying to check because it seems outrageous. They're talking 70,000, but that doesn't seem right. Okay, so I'm just saying it, but I'm kind of like saying it and pulling it back because that doesn't sound right. That sounds like too many men for one particular unit. Okay, but okay, well we'll see. But it was a substantial number. I mean, it was big enough that it was a prize. And the Russians basically, by going for Kiev, going for Kharkov, with the intention of semi-encircling it or encircling it, but not assaulting the city. And what happens? Well, all of a sudden you've got all these Ukrainian soldiers who have to defend it. They have to defend it because if they let it fall, it would be a huge political blow. I mean, if Kiev falls, that's kind of like the end of the war, really, on a political level. There might be still fighting, there might be still resistors, but it would be like a big, big nail in the coffin of the whole war, right? To a lesser extent, something similar could be said about Kharkov, but certainly attacking in the direction of Kharkov, surrounding it, pinning down a lot of Ukrainian soldiers. Oh yeah, that's a cost-effective way to prevent any reinforcements from getting to the Donbass main army. Mhm. And so that's what the Russians did. See? And see, I understood from the very beginning that the Russians had no intention of assaulting Kiev or Kharkov. They were surrounding them, the cities, but they had no intention of assaulting them. But the Americans see this as a failure on the part of the Russians. You guys are listening to me on internet, right? And why is that possible? How is that possible? Well, because the Russians haven't bombed the internet connections and cell phone and all that stuff, and let alone the electricity. Right? You can tell, there's light here. Mhm. And so the Russians, they could hit these targets, but they haven't because they didn't want to. Mhm. And that's the key issue. And the Western observers, note, but sort of like dismiss the fact that the Russians just, obliterated the Navy. The Ukrainian Navy's gone, it doesn't exist. And they have, 85% air superiority. I mean, they've neutralized at least 75% of the airplanes that the Ukrainians had. I mean, they own the skies as a practical matter. Mhm. And so this is supposed to be a loss. And I'm like, what are they talking about? And I've been in a lot of Twitter spaces. I've been chronicling how I get kicked out of them all the time because they don't want to hear what I have to say, because they don't like it, because they don't like the truth. And here we come to the weird stuff. And here we come, like I've told you before, you know, abductive logic. Uh, how many people are watching, by the way? Oh wow, 8,700. Wow, that's very. It's really that many? Sorry, I just have to. Wow, that's kind of crazy. 8,700 people with nothing better to do on a Saturday. You poor dumb bastards. Anyway, yeah, listening to some random guy stuck in a closet in Ukraine. You guys, man, you got to get a life. You 87 losers, 8,700 losers, you got to get a life, man. I mean, it's bad enough that this is my life, but you guys, you're free. You're not in a war zone, man. Come on, enjoy the sunshine. Anyway, on a serious note, see, I studied philosophy, right? And C.S. Peirce was a famous philosopher, an American philosopher of the pragmatist school. And pragmatist school is what you'd expect. And he was the one who basically defined the basics of logic. And he identified three kinds of logic, and I've said this before, by the way. Inductive logic, deductive logic, and abductive logic. And deductive and inductive, you know what that is. But abductive logic is very, very key. It's when you see a lot of data points. And in and of themselves, each of these data points doesn't mean much. But when you combine them, you can extrapolate from them to a common cause and figure out, oh, this is what's going on. Okay? It's basically an educated guess. Now, abductive logic, you'd think, well, an educated guess, that's just bullshitting. No. Think about it. See, an educated guess is the very foundation of the scientific method. Mhm. Oh, here's my Moroshinska. I don't know if you can see it. There we are. Yeah. Mm. Anyway, an abductive inference is the basis of the scientific method, because how do you come up with a hypothesis? You see a bunch of data points and you say to yourself, oh, these data points, maybe there's a connection there. Maybe they are from this cause. And you start to formulate your hypothesis and say, maybe this is the cause of these effects that I see. And from that hypothesis, you design experiments and you test those experiments using the scientific method of experimentation, and you arrive at conclusions as to whether the hypothesis is valid or not. So you see how important abductive reasoning is. It's the basis for all hypotheses, the basis for all theories, because the latter is, an educated guess, and that becomes a hypothesis. And the hypothesis, after being tested, it becomes a theory. And the theory, after being relentlessly scrutinized and tested, becomes a law. The law of gravity, for instance. And you see my point. You see how the ladder works, you know? Abductive inference, that is an educated guess, hypothesis, theory, law. Okay? And that's why abductive inferences are so important. And that's why you guys always laugh at, all these predictions that I make, and a lot of them aren't true or don't come true, right? It's not that they're not true, it's that, the guesses I make are wrong. But see, that's the thing about abductive inferences. Most of them are going to be wrong, but they will make you think in productive ways. That's why it's so valuable. Okay? And so have I got some abductive reasoning for you, because dude, I've been seeing all kinds of weird shit. And because of, how I'm set up, I'm on a phone and I don't have the ability to share a screen. So um, I have posted on my Telegram. The Telegram channel is in the description of this live stream. And if you go to that channel, the second to last post on my channel there, you're going to see like a bunch of screenshots, and I want you to check them out. Okay, have them handy. Oh well, yeah. Let me talk. Let me backtrack a little before I get into my theory. Let me just tell you about how the state of things are. Um, First of all, in terms of the status of forces here, the Russians are pretty much they've surrounded Kiev. They're not making any real offensive moves. They haven't been making any offensive moves towards Kiev. They're basically been drawing forces, drawing Ukrainian forces. And a lot of people in the West keep insisting that in the northwest of Kiev, in Holomel and around that area, that the Ukrainians are counterattacking and encircling the Russians and winning. That's not accurate. Okay, it's not accurate. It's more wishful thinking. Okay, because there have been counterattacks in the Holomel area and so forth, but they have not been effective. They have not been decisive because the Russians, they're not interested in advancing because that's not their mission. Their goal is to draw forces. And so what they do is that when they start getting a counterattack from the Ukrainians, they start gently pulling back, you know, and gently pulling back. And once the Ukrainians run out of steam, that's when the Russians push forward, but never to break really through and go into the city, because the Russians realize that the costs of assaulting Kiev would be enormous in terms of men and destruction of the city and of the civilians. But waiting it out and just pinning men down, that's effective. See, so that's what the Russians are doing. And the Ukrainians can't do anything about it, because if they leave, then the Russians just capture the city and it's a huge political blow. Kiev has fallen. Imagine the headlines, right? And so the Ukrainian army is stuck there going through supplies and ammunition. And the Russians, yeah, they might have had a logistic hiccup or two, or maybe serious problems with logistics, but it doesn't really matter. Even very serious problems do not matter. Why? Because Russia is right there. And Russia can keep them supplied. And it could be that they have logistic screw ups that last 2, 3, 4 days even. But eventually those supplies are going to come through. But in Ukraine, they can't, not for the Ukrainian armed forces, because the Russians have interdicted those resupplies. And in fact, lately, they've been going out of their way to blow up fuel depots. The Ukrainian armed forces are running out of gas if they haven't already. Nobody really knows, of course, because nobody's going to say that, okay? And the opposing army is not going to be really sure, and the Ukrainian army is certainly not going to say how much gasoline they have left, but probably very little, okay? The way things have been going, the fact that they are not involved in big maneuvering to counterattack kind of like proves the point that they've run out of gas or are there yet, are nearly at empty, okay? Okay, so insofar as Kiev is concerned, nothing much is going on. The status quo. Kharkov is about to get encircled, completely encircled, okay? I'm actually kind of surprised it hasn't happened already. But I hear it, the shelling has started moving around, it means that they're coming around. They're encircling the whole city, okay? But like I've said, the center of the city is in pretty good shape. Mm? And there's no combat in the center of the city. And yeah, so that's where we are. A lot of people are talking about Dnipropetrovsk, which is pretty much in the center of the country, center east, sort of. It's a major city. I don't think that the Russians are going to really bother with it because it doesn't have any kind of strategic importance. And so I think that they're just going to ignore it. The other thing that I think that they're going to ignore is Odessa, because Odessa is a lot of fighters that they are busy defending it and getting ready for a big assault. And I think that that fear of a big assault is enough to pin down a lot of Ukrainian men. And so, it's as good as actually invading it. See what I mean? I mean, at the end of the day, you want to uh, uh, you want to neutralize the opposing army, but that doesn't necessarily mean killing them and fighting them to make them dead. It could be just having them there pinned down, not being able to do anything while you're busy off elsewhere, making shit happen. You see what I'm saying? And I think that that's a strategy that they're taking with Odessa. Why bother with Odessa when you can just scare them into being, defending the city, and you just ignore them and do other stuff, and eventually at the end, it'll just fall on its own weight, because Odessa at this point has no way of being resupplied or reinforced with more troops or anything. I mean, it's isolated, and if you look at the geography of the city, it's on the coast on the west side of the isthmus of Crimea, and so in a very real sense, it's isolated from the rest of the country, and in a very real sense, there's no way for anybody, any Russian forces and materiel to get there. So it's kind of like over for Odessa. Okay. Now the big story, of course, was Mariupol. Mariupol, it's sort of fallen. Okay, it's not completely fallen because the Azov forces, which is where they were concentrated in Mariupol, uh, they've been broken as an effective fighting force. That is indisputable. They've been completely broken, but there are pockets of resistance, and I'm talking block by block kind of thing. Okay, that kind of mopping up is going to get ugly, and it's going to take a long time. And the reason it's going to be ugly and take a long time is because the Azov forces know that they're dead men if they get captured, and a lot of them have tried to slip away and gotten caught. All kinds of foolishness of dressing up as women and shit like that. But eventually, these Azov guys are all going to get caught, and their fate is going to be very, very ugly. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the Russians have made it really clear. Okay, and so the Mariupol is not pacified. It is in the control of the Russians. The Azov forces are not being resupplied, but their position is hopeless. It's over for them. Okay, it's over. But they're going to continue fighting because they know that their fate is likely to be so gruesome that they prefer to go down fighting rather than surrender. And if I were those men, I'm not sure I would disagree with that decision. Okay, because I think that the Chechen fighters who are there, who want blood,